starting to hear, and we'll just go.
All right, good. Okay, so this is a Kenmore 10 stitch sewing machine, and it is a very good, reliable old machine. The older machines, they're better machines. I'm going to give you a basic course 101, how to take out that frustrating aspects of your sewing machine. And if you can remove the frustration, sewing can become something enjoyable. First of all, let's talk the most important part, is thread. Everybody just puts on thread. They don't realize what they're putting on. First of all, a good thread and a bad thread, you can break it, you can see how strong it is. The other aspect about thread is if I take about this much thread, about 6 inches of thread, put it together, that's not bad. It's not a bad twist. But if I have threads that twist up and curl up on each other, well, that little twist can get caught somewhere and occasionally break, and you don't know why, and you rethread it up and everything else. So ensure that you have a good thread. Different brands of thread. Some people recommend Coats, some people recommend Gutermann and everything else, right? They're all comparable. I prefer 100% polyester because it's always consistent. The minute you start getting into threads, and if it has a lot of fiber to it or whatever, well, that fiber will eventually break down and go into your machine, and you need to service it a lot more often. So 100% polyester is what I generally go with, and I always make sure it doesn't have too much of a twist. The second aspect of thread is this: if your spool of thread has a little nick to it and you hold the nick in or whatever, always keep the nick to the top on this particular machine. If it's a side load, you'd always keep it to the back. The reason why is the thread comes down and actually catches into there and suddenly breaks, and then you got to rethread it and you got to figure it out. Okay? The other aspect of it is if you're using an upholstery thread, which is a really heavy thread, I recommend having a separate bobbin case for it. And I'll explain that to you a little bit later. So you always want to kind of keep the same thread top and bottom, but if you're using upholstery thread, I recommend a separate bobbin case, and we'll get into that. All right, threading up the spool. So I'm taking this off because this is a pretty lousy thread, and you can see it's already bunching up and everything else. So I'm going to take one of my older threads and see. Okay, this one here. Yeah, that's good. Breaks good. I take it. It's got the neck to it. You have 2 spools here. You can actually wind a bobbin while you're sewing. That's number 1. Number 2 is the second spool is for that special needle that has 2 needles to it, and you put it in and you can get 2 straight lines and a covering stitch on the bottom, but that's in your attachments. Okay, I'm going to show you a quick and easy way to thread up your machines, and I'll show you the long way with this particular one. I've broken this thread off. What I'm going to end up doing is taking these 2 things and tying them together, pulling a nice straight knot. Once I pull a straight knot, what I end up doing is I'll trim off the excess. Okay, put my thread back here. I lift up my foot. When I lift up that foot, my tension actually opens here. So I want my tension open. Then I'm going to grab the thread just before the eye of the needle, and I'm going to pull the whole thread through the machine. And sometimes, if you're lucky, I can put my foot down. You can put the knot to the eye, but you hold the needle firm so you're not going to move it. You don't pull it, and sometimes it might pull through, and this time it actually did pull through. So I don't have to rethread. That's a little trick. You get the right thread and the right needle, you should be able to do that all the time. Just ensure you hold that needle firmly when you're pulling it straight back. Proper way to thread this machine is when I thread a machine, I put the foot down. I want my tension closed. And what I do is I grab the thread with one hand firmly, do my little whirly twirly there, do my little through the eyelet there. I'm holding this taut, and then I take it and I put it into my disc. And when I pull into this, I pull it in all the way. Then I lift it all the way up so that this spring comes over, which is a take-up spring, and then I pull on it. I want to pull on it, make sure I feel significant tension to it. It's not too light. Generally on sewing machines, 3, 4, 5 is the range you're going to be in, and that's exactly where I'm sitting now. Then I got threaded through my take-up lever, down, put this thread behind the thread guide, and put this one behind the thread guide. There's another thread guide here. thread guide above the needle and into the eye. But before I thread the eye, we'll talk about needles. Let's talk about the bobbin. To wind the bobbin on this particular machine, you would take your thread and you put your spool on here. Take another thread, if you want. Take it, wrap it around this little tension spring there. Take this, wrap this around there quite a few times. If you decide to put it up through the hole to make sure it's tight, when you're finished, make sure you snap off the thread. Push this in, and on this particular machine, on a lot of older machines, you hold the hand wheel, and you loosen off the grip. Okay? Now that I've loosened off the grip, it's disengaged sewing to just the bobbin winder. So now I can wind just the bobbin and the machine is not sewing. And then you wind your bobbin. Okay? And then we'll finish that off. You break that off, take off your little spool, hold the hand wheel, pinch it up, now the machine is engaged. So that's winding the bobbin. Your bobbin. Let's talk about your bobbin. Your bobbin. My name's Peter, or Peter in Hungarian, and that's spelt with the letter P. You see the line going up? I can draw a little P there, right? That's the stem, that's the thing. Drop Peter in. Once you put the bobbin in, it's going in right, then you go up and underneath the tension spring here. Okay? And then you pull on it to make sure that you feel that you got some sort of a tension. You do have a tension set screw on here, but once it's set, it's normally set. Now, back to what I was explaining to you about upholstery thread. If you start using heavy upholstery thread in this bobbin, it's going to actually stretch the spring a little bit. So when you put the other thread in, you're going to find it's too light, and then you'll have to end up adjusting your tension spring, and it'll wear out the spring. If you have a separate bobbin case just for the upholstery thread, then you don't have to worry about adjusting it. Okay? You have a latch on there. Hold the latch, bobbin doesn't come out. Let the latch go, the bobbin does. Okay? A reminder. P for Peter, drop them in, up and underneath. Okay? There. And then you take it and you put it into here. You put it into there. The machine's all threaded up other than the needle. Whenever I put my bobbin in, the first thing I'm always going to do is I'm going to put a little drop of oil in around the bobbin case area. Right? Just a little drop. It's going to lubricate the thread path and make your machine run a lot smoother. A lot of people avoid this. I wouldn't. But you always try out the machine first, and then it'll remove any oil residues on there. Okay, then I'll close it up. Needles. To see if you have a good needle or a bad needle, right? You take your finger down, you go down along the edge, make sure you don't have any burrs. If you have any burrs, then replace the needle. Okay? Needles, they come in different sizes, and when they say sizes, it means the thickness of them, right? And on a pack of needles, you're going to have these two numbers. This says 14 over 90, or 90/14, one of those two numbers. Both the numbers are the same thing. One's a metric, one's an imperial. So I use the lower numbers, and as they go up, the thicker it goes. Needle sizes go 8, 9, 10, 11, 12, 14, 16, 18. I always recommend a 14 needle. It gives you a very good range for sewing. However, if you do put in a 10 or a 9, a fine needle, when you're finished the job, put the 14 back in, because on your next job, you're going to be wanting to sew those cuffs, and that's when you break needles and you have problems. So 14 is pretty safe needle to stay inside of it. On the needle has a flat side. It has a little tiny flat side on it. And you take this flat side, and then you go up, and you make sure the flat side of the needle goes to the back on this particular machine. The majority of them are the same way, but there's some variances on different machines. Needle goes all the way up, and you pinch it. The other aspect of size 14 and all needles, the other side of the flat side, the opposite side of the flat side is actually a long groove, and you can actually put your finger into this long groove. right? Then you can always test it to make sure that you have it in proper. Okay. Also with a size 14, it's a little easier to thread. The eye of the needle is a little bit bigger. And when we're threading the needle, what I end up doing is I'll make a nice clean cut. Make a clean cut here. Grab about an inch of thread. Don't look for the eye. Look for that groove. Slide it down the groove until you get a little bit of it in the eye. Right? Once you got a little bit of it in the eye, then you can take your other finger and pull it through. Normally. You need a nice clean cut. Your clean cut should actually be on an angle too when you cut it. So I'm trying to find the eye, and what I'll do is I'll slide it down, get a little bit of it in the eye, then take your other finger, pull it up, and then you're threaded through. Okay, now you're almost ready to start. You want to pick up the bottom thread. You rotate this hand wheel always towards you, never away from you, and we pick it up, and we'll pick up the thread there. I'm going to go on straight sew here. Then we lift up this foot, put the thread behind, and make sure your take-up lever's to the top, and then you're going to grab a piece of sample fabric. Now, sample fabric, this is what I use. I use the hand towel stuff you can buy at any of the local hardware stores and everything else, and it's the industrial hand towels, right? First of all, this will absorb up any oil that in the beginning when you try out your thing. Also, if your material gets all messed up and you get lots of knotting, it's easier to rip this away than to lift it up and cut all the thread out. So always try out your machine first. Okay, we're going to put this down, put down the foot, put down the foot. Now, certain brands of sewing machines you have to do a step before it. Kenmore's are good machines, Gentleman's good machines, or whatever, but the low-end machines, you always have to do this. That was a joke, all right? Let it go. All right, we're going to start sewing. All right. There we go. We're going to think. Now that I sewed a straight line, there's two things I'm going to look for first. The first thing I'm going to look for is the stitch length, okay? How big those stitches are. My rule of thumb is the bigger the stitch, the easier it is to pick apart. So you want to be able to have a good enough stitch that you can take your seam ripper and pick the stitches apart, so you're not going to have difficulties on picking apart little tiny stitches. Those little tips make it life a lot easier if you have to pick things apart. Okay? So that's the first thing I look at. Second thing I look at is the bottom. Okay? I look at the bottom, I look at my tensions. This is where everybody's ears are all open because they want to know about tensions. Tensions work like this. First of all, if I was to pull with my foot down, my tension closed, and I pull on this, I should feel significant tension. A lot of people might think it's a little bit too tough. It's actually not. The second thing, a little bit about tension, is your bobbin case tension. Your bobbin case tension should be 2.5 times lighter than your top. So the top one's a lot heavier than the bottom. The bottom one has to have tension, but it doesn't have to be a significant amount. Now, tensions work like this. Okay. If you pretend or imagine that this thickness of this fabric here is your thickness here. Here's my top thread, here's my bottom thread. If I start seeing little tiny loops on the bottom, I will tighten the top and make that knot pull it up, right? If I start seeing loops on the top, before I adjust this, I'm going to check to make sure my bobbin thread is threaded properly and did not come out, because you don't want to adjust that when that has come out. So just double check your bobbin tension instead, and if it's still on the top, then you'd end up loosening it, right? Generally, you're going to be at 3, 4, 5, okay? The other time you might loosen it is when we get to puckering, but we'll talk about that in a second. All right. There we go. Put our foot down. Okay. Next thing is, on this foot, on this particular machines, and one of the older machines, they have this pressure, you can put the amount of pressure on your foot. A lot of people don't know what it's used for, but I'll give you a good example. I can push this down